What's up? What's up in the house? I'm in the land of Lincoln. That is really great. Oh my God, you guys can't even believe what I'm going to show you. It's so good. So good. I've been working with this photographer that photographs Lincoln impersonators. She's got this photographic series called 19 Lincolns. It's like the best thing in the world. Because, oh wait, hold on. All right, hold on. I always make up, you'll see, I kind of make this stuff up as I go. But you got to see this. Wait, image. Oh, it's going to do this. I just got to show you some Lincolns real quick. Because I'm in the land of Lincolns. Who likes Lincoln? Raise your hand. See, then when you're in front of the class, you can do that kind of like, raise your hand if. All right, who doesn't like Lincoln? Raise your hand. All right, a Lincoln hater. Be careful, you know, you're in the land of Lincoln. Here, I just want to show you. Okay, so these are some Lincoln impersonators. What do you think? Is that nice? Looks pretty good. It's pretty, that's pretty. Lincoln and Lincoln's son. That's pretty good, isn't it? All right, that's pretty nice. I'll show you. Okay, well, check this out. Okay, we're going to do a video to kick this off. This may be the most important art project of 2005. We're at the Golden Globes of art projects, all right? And the winner, play. Oh, come on. Watch this, when he touches the kid. Yeah, that's the raddest. You got to see the baby. The baby is the best. Wait, oh, where is it? Oh, here it is. All right, we'll fade out. We're going to do a fade out. So that's maybe the raddest dude in the world right now. He was, oh man, I should, you know, okay, this lecture's really about that man. He was a stuntman for Star Trek. Is that the raddest? I was like, what did he do? I didn't know Star Trek needed stunts. But anyways, I just think that's about the best piece. That's the thing, you know, that's like the best piece of art made in 2005. Just, I don't know, it's pretty much agreed upon in the art world. So I'm just, you know, I think from there, I'm just going to talk about everything that's kind of less than that. We're going to try to get back to that in terms of worth. So, My name is Nato. No. That's not what I want to do. My name is Nato Thompson, and I'm a curator at MASS MoCA, the Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art. Has anybody been there? All right. See, I also do market data as a part of my job here. So, good. Okay, I'll take that back to the museum, let them know. But it's one of the largest contemporary art museums in the country, and it's so surreal when people look at you doing this because you're like, it feels like you're in my privacy. You're in my desktop. No, but you guys are getting a lecture which I've titled The Big Lecture 2006. All right, here you go, Big Lecture 2006. We're pulling out all the stops. But a little background about me. I am now working for a contemporary art museum. I never thought I'd ever have a job. I grew up in Oregon for a little while, where I thought I was going to be a professional breakdancer. And I had a crew called the Brothers Magic with my brother. And I was Sweet Pea and he was Baby Flex. We moved to LA, and then I was excited because I wanted to move to the ghetto. I was like, Mom, Dad, I want to move to the ghetto. And they were like, what's wrong with you? And then, so we moved to Southern California, but breakdancing apparently was out by the time I got there. And the only people that were left breakdancing were the other Hispanic kids who made fun of me in Spanish, and I joined a gang, and they beat me up all the time. And I experienced deep alienation for a while in California, because all the other kids were surfers, and I was a breakdancer. And then I moved to the Bay Area, and I went to undergrad at Berkeley, and I studied political theory. And that's when I wanted to be, at first, a professional anarchist. And I started an art space, and that wasn't working out either. And so when I got out of undergrad, which I tried to stay in forever, because everyone that I went to undergrad with was like, why don't you want to just get in the real world? And I said, because I know about the real world, and it's horrible. And I was like, I want to be in school forever. Anyway, so I tried. So I stayed in undergrad for 8 years. And you can do that too. If you just strive for it. And then I had to get out, and I had to get a job. You guys will too, and it's going to hurt bad. At least it hurt for me. And I did telemarketing for a while for a company called Expressly Portraits, where I sold family portraits. And then I worked for Farmers Insurance, where I did filing for an insurance company, where I got fired because I smelled. It's the most humiliating experience to be fired for that. I didn't think I smelled. I felt really horrible about it. I was like, you can't fire me, I quit, because I smell. And then I worked for Kinko's for 2 years. And I'll just tell you about that experience, and this kind of sets up my lecture. Because my lecture is about radical art practice, political art, in this kind of vague way. But the reason I'm being so biographic about it is because it's about life. It's about jobs. It's about being. And my experience at Kinko's as a co-worker, that's what they called it. I wasn't an employee, I was a co-worker. Was really horrifying, because I felt like, that job sucks. I don't know, who here's worked at Kinko's? Oh yeah, do you have nightmares of copy machines? Oh yeah, right. That was when it was a fresh startup. I actually saw Mr. Kinko speak at a conference once, and he talked about if Kinko's died and went to heaven. No, if Kinko's died and that company at Starbucks were waiting at the gates of heaven, who would get in? And I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. Anyways, this is what I gotta say. I had a nightmare one time about these clerics that were in red robes gathered around a color copier. And I was like, what are they doing? And then I looked, and the color copier was shooting out red paper. And I go, cleric, what is happening here? And they go, my son, the color copier is bleeding. And I walked in and I quit. I woke up in the morning and said, okay, time to quit. So that's where I start with this. So let's talk about aesthetics and visual culture. These are the aesthetics of everyday life. A lot of you are going to look, when you get out of college, you're going to go and get into the workforce, and you're going to look at a world that looks like that for the rest of your life. Many of us face a world like this, if not worse, most days of the week. Art may not be up to the task of confronting this, but responsible citizens should. The social world itself can be a compelling canvas to work on. We may feel like spectators, but in fact, the show is our own lives. And that's the show you get to watch. Is that horrible? Man, this is like, I made this lecture when I kept thinking about telemarketing. Oh my God, that's what I looked like every day. You know what, at telemarketing, I'll just go through these rants, but it'll all apply. This is an educational experience. At telemarketing, when I did the family portraits of selling on the phone, we didn't even get commissions for selling more. We just got a big pencil on our desk if we sold the most. And I'd walk into the office place and I'd be like, oh my God. And people were like, I'm getting the pencil today. I'm like, oh my God. You don't want the pencil. Or those under our thumb. Madness is an everyday affair. That's also the world we're going into. Let's all play a game called What is Happening in That Picture? You ever play Google games with image searches? And you're just like, I gotta find the craziest picture in the world. So that's my donation to the game. You go find your crazy picture, okay? Mine is the military open Taco Bell with balloons and a man in a gordita outfit with a clenched fist. So we're going to go down memory lane. Now we're going to get history. We're going to talk about history. We're going to talk about the 1990s. Oh, the last decade ago. It's so long ago, the 90s, but we're going to take a walk down memory lane. It's a period of what I call visual exhaustion. You guys remember Bill Clinton? Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton came into office, and do you know what his first act in office was? Do you guys remember? Anybody? It's right there. He reunited Fleetwood Mac. That's what he did, because that's Stevie Nicks, and that's Mac, Fleetwood, they're all hanging out. Remember that? I don't know if anyone remembers, but that's what it is. He reunited Fleetwood Mac because he was the baby boomer president, right? And he was the president that was like the cool president. He didn't inhale, remember? He was like on MTV and he was playing a saxophone, like some sort of cool Kenny G, right? And everyone's like, ew, he's cool. He plays the saxophone, what? But anyways, he was the cool president. And like, his whole thing was like, he thought of himself as kind of an Andrew Jackson, right? He was the people's president, gone to the day of the World War II vets. Here comes the baby boomers, the 60s generation, coming into office, and they're going to have a party on the White House steps, and Fleetwood Mac is playing. Woo-hoo! And that's kind of set the tone for the 90s. You kind of felt that party happening the whole time. Because it was a time of revolutions, but not revolutions of like cultural revolutions, people overthrowing power, getting more freedom worked out for themselves, none of that kind of revolution. They were marketing revolutions. Let's look at the biggest one. No. Wait, no. I have to get this to start right. You have to see this in all its glory. That's not made up. That's real. That's actually the biggest, most expensive marketing campaign in the 1990s, was that little Chihuahua. We all know the Chihuahua, right? The Chihuahua was the dog of the 90s because of that thing where they turned Che Guevara, a revolutionary from Cuba, into a Chihuahua, selling gorditas. Here's another one. Wait, no. Come on. Oh, there he is. Revolution's a taco. So good to know. But everything's kind of a revolution in the 90s. everything. You know, this is the 90s of the year where all counterculture becomes mainstream, right? Everything is in. You guys, the epitome now, though, it's a fait accompli. Now it's just is. But you experienced it now. But these are the precursors to what is now the beginning decade of the 21st century. Jack Kerouac, as opposed to just being a beatnik who was kind of striving across America to find his kind of beatnik roots, was also wearing khakis for Gap. And unbeknownst to Gandhi, despite just also kicking out the British Empire out of India, he was selling computers. That's great. Think different, Gandhi. That's awesome. But you know, now it's so funny because this kind of sensibility that kind of began to get a lot of inertia in the 90s of this marketing revolution where they suck every visual representation of people that were producing meaningful culture to deal with power, to expand freedom, to try to deal with civic ways of understanding the world. Their image is sucked out of them and transposed onto some sort of bad corporate campaign. Like, this actually feels like the most obvious idiotic idea, but it worked. And through the 90s, you see it all over the place. But now, you guys have Hot Topic out here? Oh my God, is that the perfect raddest store? That is the raddest store in the world, because you can go in there and you're just like, oh my God, it's like the end of the world in that place. Because you can get your anarchist bracelet, right? You're like, hey, I'd like to be an anarchist. $6, please. You're all, all right. You're all, wait a minute, can I be goth? And they're like, sure, here. You put on these pants. You're like, okay, come out of there. For like $26, you're like totally against everything. It's the best store. It's the best store. The mall is just like, and it's so fun too, because the mall looks like everybody went in there for $26 and came back out. You know what I mean? Everyone's like, oh, hey, where you been? Hot Topic. How'd you know? I can tell by your anarchist bracelet, actually. But you know, that's where we're at now, right? Where like the representation of resistance, or the representation of people trying to speak civically, is now a product. A really consumable, cheap product, I might add. To some degree, sexy if you're into goth or something. But so there's a lot of ways in which people try to deal with that. And like, here's a classic one that everyone's familiar with, and that's called like, basically trying to deturn, as these French dudes, the Situationists used to say, deturn the major corporate image. So you're like, what do we do with all this? Hey, maybe we can just make our own version. So they do this kind of thing, McDev. So I did a show called The Interventionists, Art in the Social Sphere, in 2002. And it's a look at this kind of political art practice. But let me say something, because I always feel like I'm in defense of political art, right? In defense. But I don't want to talk about, like, I'm not talking about art that's like, vote dude into Congress, right? Or like I think some people think like political in this very kind of like, political, you know, political, like, save whales. Oh, I'm really political. I recycle. You know, like that kind of political. I'm political. A, B, C, D. I'm pro-choice. I'm political. I mean, you know, this reductive language of politics is. Let's go back a little bit. We're talking about producing meaning, like communicating with each other, about people talking, right? How do we do that without having a ton of cash on our side? Or how do we do it without like having like a Mac logo behind it, right? You're like, meaning, sponsored by Apple. Meaning, want a burger? Meaning, I'm in a gordito outfit. Like, that's the problem, right? And like, it's really important to lay that out, because sometimes I think, I'm doing like a PR campaign for political art, I guess, but like, I'm trying to say we're talking about, it's not just a right-wing, left-wing issue. It's about an issue of trying to produce conversations between people. And that's what we're talking about here. When I go through this kind of like little walk through memory lane of the 90s, this is not a question about setting up some sort of political platform. This is a question of the ways in which meaning has been, turned into chihuahuas, right? The things that become tacos. The things are all now pants that sold to you. And like, how do you get out of that trap? Because I bet you all grew up, oh, here's another thing. it's not coincidental that this kind of form comes to a head in the 90s when the United States economy has switched dramatically to a cultural information economy. We're all familiar with that phrase, right? We're in the information age. But what does that mean to you personally? Well, it's the production of culture. And unlike the production of cars, right? We understand the production of a Ford plant, right? That makes sense. Car comes out, right? That makes sense to us. That's a job. Someone's over there putting on tires, right? Or, hey, I'm down in a coal mine. I'm getting coal. Now, this is a job we understand, right? That's like, okay, that's a job. But what is cultural production? The United States exports of cultural exports are giant. I don't mean like art, but like radio, TV, film, software, that kind of stuff, right? The stuff that comprises most of our entire existence. The stuff that most of us, through that lens, understand our own being. How many of you really like music? Yeah. How convenient that it's also one of our #1 exports, right? Where we're like, hey, that's not funny. I love music. I love music. Everyone's like, I don't know about religion, but I love rock and roll. Well, be suspicious of things you love so crazily, right? Everyone's like, man, I don't know about the political world, but I want to jam. Well, all right, but you sure spend a lot of money on that. You know, I mean, seriously, iPods? It's like, that music culture is like, that's a cultural product. That's the new economy as who we think we are. So when I talk about all this stuff about meaning production, it's in us. I don't care if you're into art or not. You better just look into your soul and see Linkin Park looking back. You're like, oh my God, I've got angsty teenagers in my heart. They're there. They're the mirror. Be afraid. So, these are some ways to deal with that stranger inside. I have a problem. My computer always falls asleep, so I'm going to run back and forth a lot. So this is an interventionist. This is the idea that we're setting up here. That's actually an artist who I know who went to grad school and studied under a private detective, a magician, and a ninja. Which is like the best education you could probably ever get. Because no one would ever say that was a waste of time, right? You're like, what'd you learn? Oh, how to pick locks, hide in shadows, make things disappear. All right. You're going to go on a lot of dates and have a lot of sex. So here's our interventionist. And the interventionist in an idea is like ideas. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. Ideas are like cities. They really have walls. We're in one, right? They have buildings, and they have people that protect knowledge or protect spaces. The word Foucault uses, discourse. That feels very intellectual, discourse. But you can just say ideas are protected. Ideas are protected. And so I made these little ones like, this is the keep of art history. This is the castle critical theory, the Great Wall jurisprudence, the biotechnology bunker. For the sake of those arty types here, is this an art? Are you, any of you into art? Who's into art? All right. Oh, yeah. All right. All right. So if you're into art, then we'll demonstrate on that idea. A lot of people that are artists in the United States always are like, I'm an artist. And I'm going to get out of this little nowhere town when I get out of school, and I'm going to go to New York City. I'm going to move to Williamsburg in New York City, and I'm going to make a name for myself over there. And guess what? That's a very naive thing to do. That's what a lot of people do, though. You won't be alone. And what happens is you go into New York, and you walk along this bridge. And you come to this big castle. And you say, and they go, who goes there? And you say, well, I'm from Illinois, the land of Lincoln. And I'm here to be a famous artist. And they say, did you go to Yale? And then you say, no. And then like they shoot arrows at you, and you fall in the moat, and crocodiles eat you. That's what happens, all right? That's what happens to you. That's what will happen to you. Most of you will die by crocodiles. But the fact of the matter is, people protect what they got. It's like Capone. Ideas are like Capone, right? Machiavelli knows this. Anybody who's a good chess player understands this. People protect what they got, and the powerful like to protect what they got. That's not an anarchist idea. That's not a socialist idea. That's not a Republican idea. That's just facts. Deal with it, whiners. So, you know, when they guard the gates to art land, they guard the gates to all lands. They guard the gates to law, to philosophy, is hoping to talk. But no one's letting them in, so you got to sneak in. And sometimes when you sneak in, you get in. And sometimes when you sneak in, you get caught.
The FBI banned him from his home for 3 nights.
Tonight, the college professor at the center of a federal investigation is back in his Allentown neighborhood, but agents aren't done with him just yet. We'll go live to College Street, where News 4's Ellen Maxwell has the latest. Ellen?
Stephen Kurtz lost his wife last week, then he was forced out of his home by federal authorities. Tonight, he's back in his house, but did not want to speak on camera.
Dr. Stephen Kurtz was able to walk back into his Buffalo home for the first time since Friday night. Health officials ordered him to stay out of the house when they found he was keeping unusual cultures inside. A lab in Albany ran tests on the cultures to see if they posed any health threats.
They look for things including ricin, Yersinia pestis, which is a test for the plague, anthrax, and again, those tests have all been negative so far.
The situation began last week when Dr. Kurtz called authorities and said his wife had died. Medical professionals believe she died of natural causes. While in the house, they found the bacterial cultures Kurtz said he used as an artist. Medical professionals, police, and FBI agents closed down College Street to investigate any potential threat to the public. Some neighbors say they're relieved to hear the cultures weren't dangerous.
It was a little alarming to find out that some of us had to be walked to our own homes. Beyond that, I didn't know what was going on. The fact that we didn't know what was going on, or we weren't told, what bothered me the most.
Erie County Health Commissioner Dr. Anthony Billatier says in the post-9/11 era, authorities have to be very thorough in investigations like this. He thanked Dr. Kurtz for...
Always be wary when they use the slow motion. If you ever see yourself in the news and they begin using a slow motion shot of you, that means you're about to go to jail. Basically, they're hand in hand. One could do a media study of every time they use slow motion in the news, and they're like, that's not a... You ever seen like a good guy done in slow motion? It never happens. But you know, okay, so that story, it's a horrific tale. That's the story of this artist named Steve Kurtz and his wife who passed away, Hope Kurtz, who were part of a group called Critical Art Ensemble. Maybe some of you have heard of this story? Yeah? Show of hands? I'm joking. I'll stop doing that. Show of hands. I don't teach, you know, so I'm kind of used. I'm really enjoying this. Can I see? So who agrees with this? But this actually happened at the opening of the Interventionist show to some degree, because the Critical Art Ensemble was going to show this project called Free Range Grain, which is a laboratory where they were going to test organic foods to see whether or not there were genetically modified organisms in them. And it was going to be this kind of theater, if you will, a laboratory is theater, where people could try to get to participate in the understanding of what makes their food. Breakfast. So people come in there and be like, hey, is my organic tomato an organic tomato? Right? And they test it. Well, the problem was that laboratory, before it came to the museum, was at Steve's house. And when his wife passed away from a heart attack, he called 911, and the police came in the house and were like, laboratory? Bioterrorists! Wait, this is it! It's happening! It's finally happening! Get to the phone. Remember, we did this. This is how we do it. Okay, call them. And then everyone's like, oh my God, great, we got all this gear. Okay, everyone's coming in the house. Take that. Okay, what do you do? We've only rehearsed this. I don't know. Everyone's excited. Everyone's like, okay, undo the bag and put it in the millions of people. Actually, there's an art project that Steve Kurtz and these other guys did when they finally were let back into the house. Because, you saw it was like E.T., extraterrestrial at his home. He was like, the guy was getting like, shh. And everyone's like, and the guys were like, I don't know what's happening over there. But then when they went back, the police left so much. It was the FBI's bioterrorism unit. Left so many pizza boxes and Gatorade and gas masks. You're like, it's a weird frat gas mask party. Happened in my house. You guys threw a frat gas mask party in my house, didn't invite me. But it's serious because at the opening day of the show, Steve Kurtz was indicted by a grand jury to appear under bioterrorism charges that then got reduced to mail fraud and wire fraud, and he's facing 20 years in prison over the purchase of $300 of bacteria that are routinely traded in most biologic science circles. And the people that really came to his aid, besides the activist art community of 40, were a lot of hobby scientists who do this stuff all the time. And they were like, but I do this all the time. You can't make that illegal. And they were so Steve found himself in cahoots with a different kind of group of people, which were people that actually do science. And we're like, that's going to make it really difficult. And I bring that up, not obviously for effect, but it's also a real situation that's happening today. But it also demonstrates a point, and that is that the Critical Art Ensemble, we're dealing with biotechnology, a field that everyone says is supposed to be governed by experts, and they're a big fan of the amateur taking control of science. And the politics behind that revolve around groups that were doing a lot of AIDS research in the 80s and 90s, groups like ACT UP, who were doing a lot of AIDS activism and really felt that the pharmaceutical industries that were producing a lot of the AIDS research had a particular commercial interest in not curing a disease. Because I don't know if you know this, but you don't make much money off curing a disease. You make a lot of money off helping those that have a disease. Because once you cure the disease, it's over. You're out of business. So a lot of the people in ACT UP were like, we need to take this science into our own hands. We need to do what people are dying, we've got to solve this. And so that kind of inspiration got Critical Art Ensemble dealing with that. And like an Interventionist, they went into the biotechnology world. And guess what? Steve Kurtz is now in the moat. He's got gators eating him, and it's sad. There's a book. I'm not going to mention too many French theory people. If I do, you can shoot me with arrows. But here's one. His name is Michel de Certeau, and he wrote a book called The Practice of Everyday Life. And I mention it for two things. And I'm going to stop using his words to explain it because he doesn't explain himself well. But he came up with two terms, strategy and tactic. And this is the way I explain how strategy and tactic work. If you're a mayor of a town and you want to hold a street fair in this town, all right? So in Carbondale, you want to throw a street fair, and you're like, I'm the mayor. So you go down, call the cops, close the street, have some balloons, some pop, soda, invite some friends. Hey, you got a street fair. You're not the mayor. I want us to throw a street fair. No one wants to throw a street fair, right? So what do? You go there in the middle of the night, you put a boombox on the ground, call your friends, get a keg, and run away when the cops come. That's called the tactic, okay? That's the tactic. And there are two forms of kind of operating. Strategy is like when you own the kind of game, and tactic is when you're trespassing in the game, right? And when I was talking about this thing here, that's a kind of tactical kind of intervention, where you could think of this in territorial terms. Bear with me as we move from physical space to visual space, but we're going to make this transition easy. Here we go! So this is a visual system that's owned. It's copywritten. Got it? And then this is somebody intervening as a tactic onto that. That's private space, right? It's private visual space. Same thing with geographic space. There's space that's owned that you literally have to trespass on. And that obviously has a political dimension to it. And it's a political dimension not just of space, but of meaning production. Skip that. There's a term called the spectacle, used by this guy Guy Debord, which I always like. I came out of punk rock culture, and I was always like, you know, really anti-spectacle, so much so that I hated punk rock at some point too. But initially, I was really into it. Anyways, the idea of spectacle is the idea of visual, the culture industry, the industry of image production, right? We all know that. We all grow up in it. Kids these days see so many images, blah, 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 whatever. But it's like the world as a product of cultural meaning, right? And we all live in it. I mean, you could look at Vegas, right? There's one. Vegas is a place where you're like, it's like MTV as architecture, right? But then the mall is basically that too. I mean, basically, the entire United States is a Hot Topic store. It is. In fact, okay, so all of that is my long-winded way of trying to say we're dealing with the production of meaning. I'm going to skip this. Oh my God, I'm skipping so many things for you guys. That's a shame. But it's all right. I got a lot to show. Okay. I'm going to come back to this. I want to talk about some projects I'm doing at the museum. Because let's get to some art. You guys want to see some art? I'm somebody that would talk all day on an art topic and never show a piece of art. But I'm not going to do that this time. So my first project at the museum was at MASS MoCA. Was a show called Fantastic. And it was a show that combined, it was looking at the paranormal and the utopian in contemporary art. And at the Contemporary Art Museum, I'm always worried that people come into a museum terrified that everyone is making fun of them. It's a reasonable thing, because the history of the museum is that that's what they were doing, right? I think a lot of museums were basically for rich people to show off what they owned. And then other people go, I don't understand why this is cool. And then you're like, because it's not. That's because it's not cool. And you figured it out, so go home. But a part of the museum at MASS MoCA is I think of it as a civic space to visually explore the world, to produce meaning as a family. Because, you know, our museum gets a lot of everyday folks, and everyone comes in there, and they're like, oh, I don't want to be made fun of. But at the same time, they're like, but if we get through this, because they all get out of the car like, all right, we're going to Contemporary Art Museum family. Like kind of nervous, like, oh, I hope this is okay. But if they get through this, maybe something meaningful will happen. It won't just be a schlocky Hollywood film, right? That something interesting will happen. So I'm desperate to make something meaningful happen. So I was like, how do I make the idea of the utopian and the paranormal mean something? Then I was like, history. We can show that art actually meant something to our community, right? That like these kind of utopian ideas have a history in the area. So I put together this thing I called this Threshold of Wonder, which dealt with all these different histories in our area of the bucolic Berkshires, of that kind of utopianism. Like that picture in the middle is a picture. Apparently my town was the ballooning capital of the world for 3 years. And aeronauticists from all over the world would come to our town in North Adams to do the newest technology of ballooning. Love that. That's a great story. So I was like, here, that's wild. What do you think of that? That's Louisa May Alcott's sock. And that's a locket of her hair. And over here is a bear trap made by this community called Oneida, which was a utopian community from the mid-19th century that believed that heaven was already on earth. So why not live like that? So they all married each other, which was a group of like 60 people married to each other. And they became very well-known metal workers, but they were big vegans too. But their tragic paradox was that their biggest export was a bear trap. So there it is. There's their paradox. But they also, I also made a tabloid, like the Weekly World News is the catalog. But they also were the first ones to make pantalettes for women to wear, like which the suffragists took up as women's clothing, because women could actually work in the field with pants. And it started in that wild, wacky little commune of Oneida. In the show, we had a bunch of utopian kind of projects, but one of the really cool ones, one of the really cool ones, because the rest weren't cool. Actually, there's this artist named Niels Norman, and he, I should change this slide, because what I really want to talk about is the project he proposed for our town. In North Adams, our Kmart had closed. You know, Kmart went out of business, right? And these big box stores were like emptied. And in our town, when a store like that gets emptied, my town is empty. I live in a town of 12,000, so it's just like, oh no. What do we do with Kmart gone? So he proposed a utopian community center where you put photovoltaic cells on the ceiling, right? And then we could all set up, different community groups could set up meeting areas inside, and then you tear up that monstrous parking lot and make a permaculture community garden. And he did a kind of billboard like this in town so people could see that. And what's funny is, you know, that's a utopian idea, right? Because I was like, that's utopian. And everyone's like, yeah, that's utopian. And I was like, why is that utopian? That's such a good idea. A garden? But now, you know, my town, I mean, I hope this resonates with some of y'all. My town didn't go with the utopian proposal. In fact, they went as far away from that as they could. So it's a chain store for selling mattresses now? Because that's practical. That was the practical solution. I mean, that's kind of craziness, right? So it was really nice because that got some people in town to talk about art and thinking about how it's pragmatic in their daily life. Here's the show, The Interventionists. I made that image myself on a program called Photoshop. I did it because I can make art too. And I kind of wanted this to demonstrate the idea, which is, you know, in Sesame Street, these are the people in your neighborhood. That was the idea I was going for, where I was like, you know, like, intervention isn't about art, it's about people producing meaning, and anybody can do it. So it could be your neurologist, your doctor, your carpenter, your anthropologist, your rescuer in New Orleans. I'm joking. Sorry. Hey, I'm here to save you. Good God! Sorry. Anyway, so that was the idea, that like anybody could be an interventionist. So in the show, there were some works. And these are ways in which, if I can introduce this piece, which I think is a seminal piece by this artist named Krzysztof Wodiczko. It's called The Homeless Vehicle. This is how you can kind of get to what they're doing. Imagine you yourself are trying to talk to people. I want to talk to people. I need to talk. I need to express myself. And you go into a city, and you stand on the street, and you're like, hey, buddy, I want to talk to you. You're like, no, right? How could you talk to someone? You get a microphone? Everyone's like, no. Excuse me, sir, you have a little pamphlet? No! No one wants to talk, right? We all walk through cities like this. Don't talk to me, don't talk to me, don't talk to me. God, why is it when people talk to me, all they want is something, right? So that's kind of we're all like paranoid. Like we live in a world of visual paranoia where we're like, reasonably so. Most things we see do want something from us. We're just trying to protect our little selves. So a lot of artists are trying to get through that. They're trying to break through that, trying to get to meaning. So this artist, in his attempt to do so, produces that, which is a homeless vehicle, which you can see a homeless person can sleep in here. This thing telescopes out. And then they can put their bottles and cans in here, right? And then this thing kind of comes down, and it becomes a wash basin. And it looks kind of like a missile. So if you saw that walking down the street, right? You'd be like, I mean, you'd have to look, wouldn't you? If that was in Carbondale, would you just be like, oh, that's just a missile? I'm not paying attention to that, nope. Because I've seen a lot of those going down the street. You'd have to look. Good, okay, great. But it's not trying to advertise anything. It's just trying to get you to think. And it doesn't say, stop homelessness now. Stop homelessness now. But it does bring attention to homelessness. And that kind of non-coercive situation, right, where it's not saying you got to think this or that, but it does bring the situation to your attention, is really the powerful way it is trying to speak to you, right? You're like, oh, fuck. I got to deal with this somehow in my mind. And that's great. And so a lot of artists were really inspired by that, Krzysztof Wodiczko's work. This is a project by a group from Copenhagen, Denmark, called N55. In Scandinavia, that's where they come up with names like this. Only there, they're just like, N55, N55. And their work looks like that, where you're like, you know, it's like, is that the Borg? Who made that? So that's a home. It's called the snail shell system. You actually crawl through this little hole and get inside. There's a restroom in there and a stove. And you can roll it down the street, just moving my home. All right? Then you can put it in the water, put it on side, and you can, that's a paddle right there. And you can moor it to a dock. There's actually a little hose so you can pump water and it becomes a shower. It's bigger than most apartments in Manhattan. It's a good project. This is a project by an artist named Michael Rakowitz. It's called Parasite, and he's a student of Wadichko's. Anyways, he produced another homeless shelter. This is an inflatable shelter where the homeless person crawls in through here, parks inside, but it inflates by attaching to the HVAC systems of buildings. So it's all, and it's made with like $6 of plastic material. So unlike, it's like, if any of you designers, that's like the great coup d'etat when you're like, Christoph Wadichko, my mentor's projects cost $470 to make. Mine costs $7. Who wins? Me, the student. Okay, I won. Anyway, so he's made like 35 of these things, and he continues to make them. And it's interesting, too, because he made these because they fit under a tent ordinance in Manhattan, that this was a legal thing that people could sleep in, right? That's pre-9/11. In post-9/11, if you attach something like that, there may not be an ordinance, but you're going to jail. In fact, in post-9/11, if you do about anything in a sphere that looks like this, you go to jail. This is a project by a group called HaHa, and they had a sign on a bunch of taxis. Well, sorry, that's a lie. I lied to you. One taxi, which was GPS-triggered global positioning system. I just bought a car. My brother's like, did you get a nav system? Is that like what everybody's got to get now? It's all, take a left, take a right. I'm like, is it going to run like MapQuest? But it had a GPS system in it, and they asked people in my town of 12,000 people to say things about particular sites, and as the taxi drove by, it would say stuff, like it'd say this on the sign. So some people were very civic in their responses. Like if it went down Main Street, the sign would say, where are the benches? Which is a very political thing in my town because our mayor won't put benches in downtown because he's convinced high school kids are going to sit on them and smoke pot. But we're like, what about old people sitting down? That might happen too. So like, where are the benches? That was a political thing. Someone actually had one go by Kmart and say, I miss Kmart, which I was like, oh, what a strange form of nostalgia. I miss Kmart. Somebody else had it go by their husband's work and wave to him and say, hi, Mike, or whatever, which I liked. Another one that I was like, almost had to boot out, went by somebody's house and said, crack house? It was all crack house, crack house. And I was like, that's like bad, right or wrong. It is a crack house. Okay, great, you're going to get shot. It isn't a crack house. Now you're going to get sued. Which one is it? You lose. Oh, whatever. But we didn't either. None of those happened. But it's a great way for the town to just talk to itself. That'd be a great project here. I mean, it's a great project anywhere. They did this project also in Chicago when people were much more like political. In my town, everyone was very nostalgic. Like, it was very like, you know, I worked during World War II in that building making gas masks. Or like a lot of memory was retained in these signs. I thought it was great. It was really great. People like that project. I come from our town's very working class. So when people like the project, like, and people like that project. It's like, they don't always, people don't always like the projects. This is a project by an artist named William Popel, who has a book out called William Popel, the Friendliest Black Artist in America. And he is, I guess, right? He produced a project called The Black Factory, which is this truck here, that went around disintegrating blackness, if you will. What it did was it'd show up at sites and ask people to contribute items of blackness. There he is. He comes to your, he's the raddest. He comes to your town. We set this thing up. We set that whole truck up in our local mall in front of Old Navy. And we were there, and like, this table, which is called the pulverizing center, had chainsaws and like all this destructive devices on it. And people were asked to contribute items of blackness, and then they would pulverize the blackness in front of them and talk about what was black in it. Right? It sounds like a crazy idea, but then people immediately start talking about race in my mall, which you don't hear. And it was really amazing. They got into so many conversations as this crazy Willy Wonka comes visiting the town kind of way. It was great, and it was kind of confrontational, too. It was really kind of like, some public art's very nice, but some stuff's just very, like, mean. Like, I don't know if it was mean, but it's kind of like, let's talk about blackness. I remember one lady was like, I understand depression. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I just may have locked my keys in my office.
You need to, what she needed to do in grad school is study under a ninja, a private detective, and a magician. Your problems would be gone. But anyway, so this project was like, it's so funny. One lady I remember said, I understand depression. He's like, oh, really? She's like, yeah, I'm a Wiccan. You don't understand religious oppression until you're Wiccan. He's like, all right, cool, we're getting on the same page. I can go on and on. I'm going to move quick. I got so many projects to show. This is a project by a group called Yo Mango, which is Spanish for I Steal. They're a bunch of Spanish anarchists. They have a fluctuating group, like of 60 people. Their person that they use as their kind of icon is Winona Ryder, that has a Yo Mango tattoo on her. And what they had was this bag, which is called the Yo Mango bag. And that bag is for shoplifting. It's a bag for stealing. And they would go in front of sweatshop labor using stores and throw street parties in front of the stores. And then they'd all run in mass and steal everything in the store and leave. And then they would take the tags out of the clothes and sew in their own Yo Mango fashion label. And then they give the clothes away. And that was their Robin Hood Yo Mango gesture. Very sweet, isn't it? Some people I say that to are just like, you're advocating stealing. I'm just showing it, man. I didn't say steal. I'm just saying. Actually, in the catalog to the show, our director of the museum was like, he said, well, listen, because they didn't want us to show just one bag, so they had us make all these patterns of shoplifting bags that people could make themselves. And he's all, please make the shoplifting bag after you've left MASS MoCA. They're all, hey, you got a shoplifting bag, I'm stealing everything in your store. Oh, that was I didn't want to do that. Cruising. You guys know the Reverend Billy? He has the Church of Stop Shopping, which, it's funny. Some artists, I lived in San Francisco for a while, and some artists like, were mumbling on the streets. We're just like, oh my God, Starbucks again, this Disney store, I can't deal with this anymore. And you're like, man, you better start making some art or you're going down. You're just going to be mumbling in that corner of San Francisco your whole life. And I think that's what happened to Reverend Billy, and he donned the preacher outfit, was like reborn. It's like, I've got to preach now. I got to spread the gospel of stop shopping. So he'd start going to Starbucks, and like Disney, that's him in Disney store with a Mickey Mouse over his head. Probably terrifying some poor child. What's he doing with Mickey? He's like, what's Mickey doing to you, child? Actually, he was so successful in preaching at Starbucks that Starbucks gave him the greatest honor of producing a pamphlet distributed to all their stores saying what to do if Reverend Billy enters your store. That's like affecting change. But it's funny, too, because sometimes I'm like, with this kind of work where it's like so anti-consumerist, I'm always like, but I thought the problem was no one had any money to spend. Do they have money to spend or not? Is the problem that we're spending too much? I'm broke. Maybe I want a Mickey Mouse toy. Anyways, I really like the project, but sometimes I can rip on my own project.
The Institute for Applied Autonomy was founded in 1998 as a technological research and development organization dedicated to the cause of individual and collective self-determination. Our mission is to study the forces and structures which affect self-determination and to develop technologies which extend the autonomy human activists. This initiative, known as contestational robotics, inverts the traditional relationship between robots and authoritarian power structures by meeting the needs and budgets of resistant forces.
Little Brother, the first contestational robot to be completed by the IAA, is a propaganda robot which distributes subversive literature. The robot is designed to bypass the social conditioning which inhibits activists' ability to distribute propaganda by capitalizing on the aesthetics of cuteness. Little Brother has successfully infiltrated both the senior citizen and child demographic groups, traditionally regarded as unreachable by activist organizations. Head-mounted sonars enable Little Brother to track passersby and address them accordingly. The robot's form references a tradition of robot aesthetics developed in science fiction and popular media.
Thanks for stopping by.
The current focus of this initiative is the robotic graffiti writer. Graffiti writer was developed as a tactical street weapon which could further extend the abilities of human activists to participate in real-world public acts of subversion while retaining essential out-of-range anonymity. Graffiti writer is a teleoperated robot which employs a custom-built array of spray cans to write linear text messages on the ground at a rate of 15 kilometers per hour. The robot can be deployed in any highly controlled space or public event from a remote location. Once graffiti writer is navigated into place, a push button triggers the high-speed printing process. The robot is then navigated to a secluded pickup area where it is considered a worthy sacrifice for popular rejection. In addition to these covert applications, the Graffiti Writer Project brings the power of mediated criminal experience to a wide audience of cultural participants. Recently, IAA researchers deployed the Graffiti Writer in a series of public space experiments. This field testing revealed that in nearly 100% of the cases, a given agent of the public would willingly participate in high-profile acts of vandalism, given the opportunity to do so via mediated telerobotic technology. Test cases who violated local ordinances governing graffiti in public areas included students, municipal workers, homeless people, and others.
The Institute for Applied Autonomy is currently accepting applications for its Winter 2001 research program.
Girl Scouts rule. Not the funniest. Okay, I got a few more things to say. This is a project by an artist named Alex Villar. I wish I had video of it, but so these projects happen in public space. You know the idea of public space. But it's because that's like there's all kinds of reasons to do it, but a lot of people do that because they're interested in either addressing a general public, or it's a space where these ideas of ownership and civicness come to a head. And these performative gestures aren't necessarily just read as art, but read as gestures, open-ended to some degree. This artist, Alex Villar, had a project called Temporary Occupations, where as you can see, and I'm sure many of you could probably walk through your own town and see spaces like this little corner of the building is fenced off. You know what I mean? You see those spaces all the time where you're like, the city has stopped making sense. So they're protecting that corner. So he would jump in over the fence in his performance and kind of just use the space, and then he'd hop over the fence and he'd disappear. And he did all kinds of those projects where he'd see two buildings separated, and he'd move in between the city. Between the walls. And that was him demonstrating the force of the city or resisting the city in some sort of Charlie Chaplin way. This project by this group called the Yes Men, who had a movie out, and I thought, oh my God, the Yes Men are going to be famous. But no one saw it. And so whatever, I was like, my friends are going to be famous. But my friends are never famous. So what they did was they used to have a site they used to have a group called Artimark, which was doing parody websites. Remember the 90s? Everyone was doing websites. Remember the internet? Dear esteemed colleague at the World Trade Organization, we are proud to invite you to host our conference on textiles in Salzburg, Vienna. And then if you can imagine being these guys, you're like, okay, sounds good. We'd like a limo. You're like, what does the WTO ask for anyways? You're like, what would be too much? No, that's crazy. We can't invite, that's too much. That's the WTO. Anyway, so they would actually go to these conferences and present as the World Trade Organization. So this is a clip when they went to Tampere, Finland at a textile conference, and they presented about the future of management. Because what they said was the problem facing management today was not, the problem facing management today was that how do you manage workers in places like Africa and Southeast Asia while you're in the first world while retaining a sense or maximizing your sense of leisure, right? Like these are the problems facing management. It's like how do you maximize leisure but also manage remote labor? It's like how can you get sky high on both projects, right? So their answer was this. Now realize this is, everyone thinks this is the WTO presenting. That, what you're looking at is the management leisure suit. It's a suit designed for total comfortability with a hip-mounted deployable modular device. And on the top of that phallus, here, right on the other side, would be a monitor where you can monitor workers working around the world in total comfort, and you could see the level of productivity, and if it waned, you could just shock them by touching it. And so, but they said, you know, this isn't completely out in production yet, but we can always hope that on the highways of progress, that these things can, in fact, exist. And that's what the WTO wants for you. And then he finished, and everyone was like, hooray! Hey, cheers, cheers, cheers! Now, there's a book written by a woman named Hannah Arendt called The Banality of Evil, Eichmann in Jerusalem. And the story goes, the great story goes, that they were trying a guy named Eichmann for being complicit or being one of the bureaucrats in charge during the Holocaust and at Auschwitz. These are the Nuremberg trials. And Eichmann's defense, which Hannah Arendt writes about, was that he was just doing his job, right? That was his defense. And Arendt says, the painful truth of the situation is that that man was just doing his job, and that his sense of ethics went in as far as his job. And when you see a conference like this, where people applaud for something as insane as that, you realize that no one's driving the ship, right? That there's no there there. That it's just like, that guy could be, I mean, like, bear with me. I know Hitler metaphors are a little overwrought, but it could have been someone like Hitler saying something, and people would just have gone. And maybe in private they would have said, that man is insane. But when it was time to act, everyone just stood by and applauded. And that's the danger we face today in all of our lives. We can't just sit back and just do our job, right? We got to do something. And I'm hoping that even in this lecture about political art, in so much as it's not just about art, it's about the production of meaning and the production of civic space. So I hope whatever you do, design, insurance, cars, whatever, that you all participate ethically in your production of meaning. Thanks. That's all.